In the forgotten corner of the Cascade Mountains, Eleanor Mitchell found herself staring at the dilapidated cabin she'd purchased, sight unseen at a county tax auction for a mere At 58, with her children grown and her divorce finalized, she'd been searching for anything to reclaim her sense of purpose. The cabin, with its sagging roof and weathered logs, represented a fresh start, a project, a sanctuary. But as she pushed open the warped wooden door that first evening, the beam of her flashlight caught something impossible: massive footprints pressed into the dusty floor, a strange collection of foraged items in the corner, and the unmistakable musky scent of something wild. What could possibly leave footprints that size in her new home? Eleanor Mitchell stared at the manila envelope containing her divorce papers, now tucked safely in her glove compartment. After 30 years of marriage, her life had been reduced to legal documents, and a settlement that felt more like a consolation prize than a new beginning. She was 58, with silver streaks framing a face weathered by both laughter and tears. Her nursing career had ended 3 years ago with a back injury, and her children had scattered across the country, too busy with their own families to notice her newfound invisibility. The cabin had been an impulse purchase, a tiny square on a county tax map with no photographs attached, just a description: abandoned structure on 5 acres, mountainous terrain, no road access last quarter-mile. The county clerk had almost laughed when she handed over the $25 cashier's check, warning her that these properties were usually unsalvageable. But Eleanor had something no one else at that auction possessed: desperation for purpose. Her Subaru struggled up the overgrown logging road, branches scraping against the windows like fingernails. The GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, and the printed directions were vague at best. Just when she thought she'd taken a wrong turn, the trees parted to reveal a small clearing. The cabin was exactly as she'd imagined and feared: a single-story log structure with a sagging roof, windows boarded with weathered plywood, and a stone chimney that listed slightly to one side. Yet something about it called to her. This forgotten place needed her as much as she needed it. Eleanor parked and sat for a long moment, gathering her courage. The mountain silence was deafening after decades of suburban noise. No traffic, no neighbors, no husband clearing his throat disapprovingly at her choices. Just wind through pine needles and the occasional bird call. She unloaded essentials first: sleeping bag, lantern, tools, food supplies. The lockbox on the door was rusted, but yielded to her bolt cutters. The interior smelled of dust, pine, and something musky she couldn't identify. Probably raccoons or squirrels had made themselves at home. She'd deal with that tomorrow. As darkness fell, Eleanor set up her camp stove on the cabin's small porch. The soup tasted better than anything she'd eaten in months. Perhaps it was the mountain air, or simply the knowledge that no one was watching or judging her choices. She'd call her daughter tomorrow to share her new address, though she expected the usual response: concerned disapproval followed by distracted acceptance. Night in the mountains was darker than she'd anticipated. Her lantern created a small circle of light that barely reached the cabin walls. The strange footprints she'd noticed earlier seemed larger and more defined in the shadows. Probably just her imagination combined with animal tracks. There were bears in these mountains, she knew, but the prints didn't match any wildlife guide she'd studied while preparing for this move. Sleep came fitfully. Every creak of the old cabin, every whisper of wind, became magnified in the darkness. Twice she woke to what sounded like heavy footsteps on the porch, but her flashlight beam showed nothing when she nervously checked. Morning brought clarity and renewed purpose. Eleanor sketched renovation plans over coffee, prioritizing roof repairs before the fall rains. The nearest town was 17 miles away, a place called Pinecrest, with a single general store that supposedly stocked everything from nails to flour. She'd need to establish herself there, find out who might be willing to deliver supplies up the difficult road. As she explored the cabin's perimeter, Eleanor noticed unusual arrangements of stones near the small creek that ran behind the property. Too deliberate to be natural, too crude to be decorative landscaping from previous owners. She photographed them, curious. The forest surrounding her new home seemed to watch her with ancient patience. Massive Douglas firs and western hemlocks created cathedral-like spaces between their trunks. Ferns unfurled at their bases, and mushrooms created fairy rings in the dappled light. It was beautiful, primal, and vaguely unsettling, like being observed by something just beyond her perception. Eleanor squared her shoulders and turned back to the cabin. Whatever watched from the forest, whatever had left those strange prints in her new home, she would face it. After surviving an empty marriage and the gradual erosion of her identity, there was very little left that could truly frighten Eleanor Mitchell. Dawn broke with gentle persistence through the cabin's dirty windows. Eleanor had slept better than expected on her second night, exhaustion overriding her initial unease. With daylight streaming in, she began a methodical exploration of her new home. The main room held a stone fireplace, its hearth littered with ash and pine needles. A rough-hewn table stood against one wall, its surface bearing deep scratches that didn't look made by human tools. The single bedroom contained only a broken bed frame and a small closet with a curious collection of items hanging from a wooden rod, bundles of dried plants tied with what appeared to be strands of coarse hair. Eleanor carefully removed one bundle, bringing it into better light. Eleanor woke suddenly, her heart pounding. The digital clock read 2:17 a.m. Something had pulled her from deep sleep, a sound from within the cabin. Not the usual settling of old timbers or the scratch of branches against windows, but something deliberate. Movement. She reached for her flashlight, hesitated, then took her phone instead. The camera might provide evidence of whatever wildlife had found its way inside. A raccoon, perhaps, or a bear cub, though the thought of a protective mother nearby sent a chill through her. The floorboards creaked under her weight as she slipped from bed. The main room lay in darkness beyond her bedroom door, moonlight filtering weakly through the grimy windows. Another sound, a soft thud, followed by the scrape of something heavy being moved. Eleanor switched on her phone's video function and took a deep breath. Whatever was happening, she needed to face it. She'd come to these mountains to reclaim her courage, not hide beneath blankets like a child. She pushed the door open slowly, wincing at its groan. The movement in the main room stopped instantly. Absolute stillness followed, the held breath kind that spoke of awareness, not absence. "Hello?" Eleanor called, immediately questioning her sanity. What intruder would politely respond? Her thumb found the phone's flashlight button. Light flooded the room, and Eleanor's scream died in her throat. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its broad shoulders hunched beneath the cabin's low ceiling. Massive arms hung at its sides, ending in hands with surprisingly delicate fingers. Its body was covered in thick reddish-brown hair, matted in places with pine needles and forest debris. But it was the face that froze Eleanor in place, undeniably ape-like, yet with startlingly human eyes that reflected intelligence, surprise, and unmistakable fear. Bigfoot. The impossible made flesh before her. The creature made a low rumbling sound, neither growl nor word, but somehow communicative. It raised one hand slowly, not threatening but cautious. Eleanor's phone slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. The flashlight beam swung wildly before settling on the creature's feet, enormous appendages with 5 distinct toes, matching exactly the prints she'd been finding. Her chest tightened, breaths coming in shallow gasps. The room tilted alarmingly as oxygen failed to reach her brain in sufficient quantity. A panic attack. She recognized the symptoms even as she succumbed to them. The edges of her vision darkened. The creature moved with surprising grace, not toward her but away, retreating to the far corner of the cabin. It crouched, making itself smaller, less threatening. Another soft rumble emerged from its throat. Eleanor forced herself to breathe deeply, fighting the tunnel vision. "I'm not," she gasped, "going to hurt you. The absurdity struck her immediately. This being could snap her in half without effort, yet it cowered from her. Understanding dawned slowly. The cabin wasn't abandoned after all. She was the intruder here. Minutes passed in standoff, neither moving. The creature's eyes never left hers, intelligent and wary. Finally, when her breathing had steadied, Eleanor slowly bent to retrieve her phone. The camera had captured only a few seconds of blurry footage before falling. Nothing that would convince anyone of what she now faced. "I'm going outside now," she said, unsure if it understood English, but needing to break the silence. I won't tell anyone about you." The creature made no response as she backed toward the door, fumbled for the handle, and escaped into the cool night air. Her car keys were in her robe pocket, a habit from decades of motherhood and emergency room shifts. Eleanor drove halfway down the mountain before pulling over, hands shaking too badly to continue. Dawn found her still there, staring at nothing, the impossible encounter replaying in her mind. She should leave, sell the property to the next desperate soul seeking mountain solitude, forget what she'd seen. Yet something held her in place as the sun rose over the pine-covered slopes. The creature had been frightened, of her, of discovery. The arrangement of stones, the carefully preserved herbs, not random at all, but the actions of an intelligent being making its home. Eleanor started the car again, but instead of continuing down toward civilization, she turned back up the mountain, toward the cabin, toward the impossible. Whatever awaited her there, she had never felt more alive. Eleanor approached the cabin with deliberate slowness, a plastic shopping bag dangling from her hand. After spending the morning in her car, alternating between terror and fascination, she had driven to Pinecrest. At the general store, she'd purchased items she hoped might serve as peace offerings: fresh berries, nuts, honey, and a loaf of freshly baked bread. The cabin appeared empty when she returned, though she knew appearances here were deceiving. She placed the food items in a wooden bowl from her kitchen supplies and set it on the porch steps. Then she retreated to her car, rolled down the windows, and waited. An hour passed before movement stirred at the forest edge. The creature emerged cautiously, staying within the tree line. Eleanor remained perfectly still as it studied her from the shadows. Finally, it approached the porch with the same surprising grace she'd noticed before, a fluid movement that belied its massive size. The being sniffed at the offerings, then delicately picked up a blackberry between enormous fingers. After tasting it, the creature gathered the entire bowl and retreated to the forest edge, where it consumed everything while watching her. When finished, it returned the empty bowl to the porch. This became their ritual over the following days. Eleanor would leave food, and the creature would eventually emerge to take it. Each day, it lingered a little longer. Each day, it moved a little closer to where she sat. On the 5th day, Eleanor spoke softly as it approached. "I think we should establish some boundaries, don't you? This cabin's big enough for both of us, especially since I'm only here during daylight hours for now." The creature paused, head tilted as if listening intently. "I'll stay out of your way in the evenings if you give me space during the day to work on repairs." She gestured at the sagging roof. "That needs fixing before winter." The being made no sound but retreated to the forest after taking the food. That afternoon, when Eleanor returned from gathering fallen wood, she found a pile of straight, sturdy branches neatly stacked beside the porch, perfect for roof supports. "Thank you," she called to the seemingly empty forest. The next day brought an unexpected complication. A truck rumbled up the logging road, bearing the Pinecrest General Store logo. Tom Winters emerged, carrying a box of supplies. "Thought I'd check on you," he said, eyes scanning the clearing. "Folks in town are placing bets on how long you'll last up here." Eleanor positioned herself between Tom and the forest edge, where she'd last seen her unusual companion. "That's neighborly of you." "I'm managing fine." Tom nodded at the roof repair she'd begun. "Impressive work for a city woman. Need any help?" "No, thank you. I prefer working alone. She accepted the supplies, trying to appear casual. Any other mountain folklore I should know about? Tom's expression grew serious. You've seen something, haven't you? Just curious. Eleanor deflected. He sighed. My grandmother claimed her father once left food for the forest guardian during a harsh winter. Come spring, he found a perfect deer hide at his doorstep. Tom shrugged. Could be nonsense, could be something more. Either way, those who respect boundaries tend to live peacefully in these mountains. After Tom left, Eleanor found a wooden bowl on a tree stump near the cabin, not one of hers. It contained wild berries, freshly picked. That evening she filled it with nuts and honey before departing, adding a note sketched on bark. A simple drawing of the cabin, with two figures, one small and one large, standing on opposite sides, with a line down the middle. Understanding boundaries transcended language. The next morning she found the drawing altered, the line erased, replaced by a circle encompassing both figures. 2 weeks into this strange arrangement, Eleanor finally moved her sleeping bag into the cabin permanently. She took the bedroom. Her companion kept to the main room at night. They never occupied the same space simultaneously, but evidence of the other's presence was everywhere. Tools moved, repairs mysteriously completed overnight, food shared in wooden bowls that traveled between them. The locals grew curious about the solitary woman fixing up the old cabin. When asked if she ever felt afraid living alone in the mountains, Eleanor would smile and say, "The forest watches over those who respect it." In her more honest moments, Eleanor admitted to herself that she'd never felt less alone. The October morning dawned crisp and bright, frost silvering the meadow grasses surrounding Eleanor's cabin. She'd been in residence for nearly a month, settling into a routine that still struck her as surreal whenever she allowed herself to truly consider it. The roof repairs were complete, the chimney restored to working order, and the windows reglazed, some of the work mysteriously finishing overnight when her strength alone would have been insufficient. Eleanor was gathering kindling when she heard the distant crack of a rifle shot. She froze. Listening, hunting season had officially begun, something Tom had warned her about the previous week. Might want to wear something bright if you're wandering the woods, he'd advised. Some of these weekend warriors shoot at anything that moved. The shot had come from the north side of her property, where the terrain grew steeper and more rugged. Eleanor dropped her kindling and hurried back to the cabin, concern mounting. Her companion, she'd taken to calling him B in her thoughts, had patterns she'd begun to recognize. He often foraged in the northern woods during morning hours. Inside the cabin, she detected immediate signs of disturbance. The back door stood ajar and muddy prints marked the floor, not B's distinctive footprints, but the treaded pattern of hunting boots. Eleanor grabbed the fireplace poker and moved cautiously through the space. "Hello?" she called. "This is private property." No response came, but a soft shuffling noise emanated from the small storage room she'd created from a former pantry. Eleanor approached slowly, poker raised. A man emerged, mid-40s with a camouflage jacket and orange safety vest. He held a high-powered rifle in one hand and wore an expression caught between embarrassment and defiance. "Door was open," he said by way of explanation. "Thought this place was abandoned." "Well, it's not," Eleanor replied coldly. "And you're trespassing." The man glanced around, taking in the renovations and signs of habitation. "Sorry, ma'am. I was tracking a deer when I saw the cabin. Just looking for a place to warm up." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You living up here all alone?" The question carried an undertone that raised Eleanor's hackles. "I have plenty of neighbors who check on me regularly," she lied, "including the local sheriff." The hunter nodded, apparently accepting this. "Mind if I use your outhouse before heading back? Been a long morning in the cold." Eleanor pointed to the door. "Outhouse is around back. Then I'd appreciate it if you'd move on to public land for your hunting." While the man was outside, Eleanor quickly scanned the cabin for any signs of B. Had he been inside when the hunter arrived? A subtle movement from above caught her eye, a slight shifting of the new ceiling beams. The storage space above the main room, too small to be called a proper loft, was just large enough to conceal something or someone new. The hunter returned, seeming in less hurry to depart. Nice place you're fixing up. Remote though, lots of strange things in these woods. He ran a hand along the table where Bai often left small carved objects for her. Buddy of mine swears he saw tracks up here last season. Big tracks. Too big for bear. Eleanor kept her expression neutral, just normal wildlife as far as I've seen. Yeah, the man set his rifle against the wall too casually, too deliberately. There's a group of us interested in what's really up here. Been rumors for years about something big in these mountains. The kind of discovery that could make someone famous, you know. A chill that had nothing to do with the October air settled over Eleanor. I'm not interested in fame, just peace and quiet. Sure. The hunter retrieved his rifle. But if you do see anything unusual, folks at Rusty's bar in Pinecrest might make it worth your while. There's a standing reward for credible evidence. After the hunter finally departed, Eleanor waited a full 30 minutes before whispering, "He's gone now." A soft thump sounded from above as B descended from his hiding place, moving with surprising agility for his size. His dark eyes met hers, and Eleanor saw something she'd never expected: fear. That evening, she hung bright orange strips of fabric along her property boundaries and placed a clear "No hunting private property" sign at the start of her access road. Later, walking her perimeter, she found the hunter's lost rifle half buried beneath pine needles near her northern boundary, placed there, she suspected, by large hands as a warning that some predators were more dangerous than others. The hunter's intrusion had changed something in their delicate arrangement. B no longer retreated completely during daylight hours, instead keeping a watchful presence just within the tree line. Eleanor often felt his eyes on her as she worked, less a threat than a protective shadow. She worried about the hunter's words, about others searching these woods with cameras and greed in their hearts. One rainy afternoon, as wood smoke curled from her newly repaired chimney, Eleanor made a decision. If they were to protect each other, they needed better communication. She gathered her art supplies, remnants from a short-lived post-divorce hobby, and began sketching on thick paper. Simple images came first: the cabin, the forest, herself, and a careful rendering of B that emphasized his intelligent eyes rather than his imposing size. She added other figures, generic humans with hunting gear, cameras, and vehicles. On the final page, she drew a question mark between herself and B, surrounded by rudimentary speech bubbles. When dusk fell, she placed the drawings on the porch with their usual shared meal. Through the window, she watched B approach. He studied each drawing with surprising focus, large fingers delicately turning the pages. When he reached the question mark, he looked directly at the cabin window where Eleanor stood watching. The next morning, Eleanor found her drawings returned, but altered. B had used charcoal from the fire pit to add details, danger zones marked around the property, specific trees highlighted as lookout points, and most surprisingly a crude but recognizable drawing of a second, smaller creature resembling B beside the original figure. Eleanor's hands trembled as she studied this addition. Was B trying to tell her there were others? Or had been others? She pinned the drawings to her kitchen wall and added a new one, a timeline with phases of the moon, attempting to ask how long he had lived here. That evening, she left the new drawing with a small wooden box containing charcoal pieces, colored pencils, and chalk. Their exchange of images continued for days, evolving into a visual conversation. B proved remarkably adept at drawing, his massive fingers capable of surprising delicacy. Through images, Eleanor learned that B had lived in these mountains his entire life, as had his parents before him, but the smaller figure in his drawing was marked with a simple X. Eleanor began bringing home children's books from the Pinecrest library, selecting those with simple text and clear illustrations. She would read aloud on the porch during evenings, ostensibly to herself, but aware of B listening from just within the tree line. Picture dictionaries became their most valuable resource, allowing her to point to words and objects, building a shared vocabulary. On a snowy November evening, Eleanor was reading by the fire when a soft knock sounded at the door. B had never approached the cabin so directly before. Heart racing, she opened the door to find him standing there, snowflakes catching in his russet fur. He held something cupped in his massive hands. Slowly, he extended his hands toward her. In them lay a crudely bound collection of bark pieces and leaves, a book of sorts. As Eleanor carefully accepted it, Bill made a sound she'd never heard before. Not a growl or grunt, but a deliberate attempt at speech. Eleanor. Her name. He was trying to say her name. Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes as she leafed through his creation. Each page contained drawings of mountain life, plants with medicinal properties, safe paths through dangerous terrain, methods for predicting weather from animal behaviors. Knowledge accumulated over generations, shared now with her. That night marked a turning point. B entered the cabin for the first time by invitation rather than necessity. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, the handmade book between them, as Eleanor pointed to objects and pronounced their names, which B would attempt to repeat. His vocalizations were labored, his vocal cords clearly not designed for human speech, but his comprehension far exceeded her expectations. By evening's end, they had established a dozen shared words and an understanding that transcended language. As B left, he placed one gentle hand briefly on Eleanor's shoulder, the first intentional contact between them. His touch was warm, solid, and strangely comforting. "Friend," Eleanor said. B nodded. "Friend," he echoed, before disappearing into the snowy night. The first significant snowfall came in late November, blanketing the clearing and transforming the forest into a monochrome wonderland. Eleanor woke to find her wood rack filled beyond capacity. He had been busy overnight, preparing for the weather he'd likely sensed coming. His knowledge of the mountain's patterns continued to astonish her. The isolation that winter would bring worried Eleanor less than it might have months earlier. Her cabin was now properly weatherproofed, the pantry well-stocked, and most importantly, she was no longer truly alone. Their communication improved daily, B's understanding of spoken English progressing far more rapidly than his ability to produce it. He could now manage several dozen words, though complex sentences remained beyond his vocal capabilities. One stormy afternoon, trapped indoors by howling winds, Eleanor decided to tackle the cabin's neglected loft space. The narrow stairs had been deemed unsafe during her initial inspection, but B had since reinforced them with his superior strength. What she had assumed would be empty space or perhaps random debris turned out to contain a single item of significance, an ancient steamer trunk, its leather straps cracked with age. The brass lock yielded easily to gentle pressure, disintegrating after decades of disuse. Inside, Eleanor found neatly folded clothing from another era, handwritten letters bound with faded ribbon, and beneath it all a leather-bound journal. The name inscribed on the first page made her gasp. Jonathan Mitchell, 1897. Her grandfather's father. This had been his cabin. The realization sent Eleanor scrambling for her phone, where she kept her family genealogy research. Jonathan Mitchell had been a surveyor for the railroad, known for his extended solo expeditions into unmapped territories. Family law painted him as eccentric, preferring isolation to society. He had died in these mountains in 1948, leaving the cabin to Eleanor's grandfather, who had apparently never claimed it. The county records hadn't shown this connection when she purchased the tax-delinquent property. The paper trail must have been lost over generations. Yet here was undeniable proof that she had unknowingly returned to her ancestral land. That evening, with B seated in his customary place by the fire, Eleanor began reading aloud from her great-grandfather's journal. The spidery handwriting was difficult to decipher, but the content proved worth the effort. March 15, 1897. Encountered the forest man again today. He left a freshly killed deer near my woodpile, the third such offering this winter. I believe I should be frightened. yet I find his presence oddly comforting in this wilderness. My colleagues in town speak of such creatures with fear, planning expeditions to hunt what they cannot understand. I have told no one of my quiet neighbor, nor shall I. Some discoveries are not meant for greedy minds. Bide leaned forward, his dark eyes reflecting firelight as he listened intently. Eleanor turned pages slowly, translating the archaic language into simpler terms when necessary. The journal documented a relationship remarkably similar to her own, with B, developing over decades as Jonathan made the cabin his permanent home after retiring from the railroad. July 10, 1922. The forest man brought his offspring to the clearing today. A smaller version of himself, with the same thoughtful eyes. I played my harmonica, which seemed to delight the little one. They are the last of their kind, I fear. The logging operations press closer each season, destroying what remains of their natural territory. Eleanor looked up from the journal to find B making a familiar gesture, hands held at waist height, indicating something small, the same motion he used when referring to the X-marked figure in his drawings. Your family, Eleanor said softly. Did you know my great-grandfather? B shook his massive head, but pointed to his chest, then held his hand at a child's height. You were the child, Eleanor whispered, realization dawning. You met him when you were young. B nodded, then made a rocking motion with his arms, the sign they had established for long ago. He had to be far older than Eleanor had imagined, perhaps 70 or 80 years if the journal dates aligned with his memories. As snowflakes danced beyond the frosted windows, Eleanor continued reading. In those yellowed pages, the past and present merged into a single unbroken story, her family and B's connected through generations on this mountain. When she finally closed the journal, B reached out one massive finger to touch the book, then placed the same finger gently over Eleanor's heart. The message needed no translation. December brought heavier snows and unexpected visitors. The first was Eleanor's monthly supply delivery. Tom had arranged for the store's four-wheel drive truck to make the treacherous journey, knowing she'd be reluctant to leave the mountain. The second arrival was far less welcome. Eleanor spotted the unfamiliar vehicle struggling up the access road around midday, a silver SUV with university parking permits plastered across its rear window. She hurried outside, grateful that B was deeper in the forest gathering pine nuts, his usual afternoon activity. A compact man in his 40s emerged from the vehicle, bundled against the cold in high-end outdoor gear. His features suggested East Asian heritage, and his smile carried the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to putting strangers at ease. "Miss Eleanor Mitchell?" he called, trudging through knee-deep snow. "I'm Dr. Marcus Way, Department of Biological Anthropology at Pacific Northwest University." He extended a gloved hand. "Hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. Cell reception is non-existent up here." Eleanor shook his hand cautiously. "How did you know my name, or where to find me?" "Small towns have talkative residents," Dr. Way smiled. "I've been conducting research in the area for several months. Your name came up at the general store as the newest resident in the most remote location, perfect for my purposes, which are documenting regional folklore and possible cryptid sightings." He reached into his pocket and produced a glossy business card. "I'm compiling what may be the most comprehensive academic study of Sasquatch legends ever attempted." Eleanor accepted the card without looking at it, her mind racing. "I don't believe in fairy tales, Dr. Way. Please, call me Marcus." His smile never faltered. "And neither do I. But I do believe in undiscovered species, misidentified wildlife, and the remarkable human capacity for pattern recognition in the face of incomplete data." He gestured toward the forests surrounding them. "These mountains remain one of the least explored territories in the continental United States. The possibility of an undocumented large primate species, while statistically unlikely, cannot be dismissed entirely without thorough investigation." Eleanor crossed her arms. "And you think I've seen something? I think you've chosen an unusual location with historical significance in local folklore. This very cabin appears in several accounts dating back to the early 1900s. Marcus glanced at the structure with professional interest. "May I come in? I've brought coffee, real coffee, not the instant variety I imagine you're reduced to up here." Reluctantly, Eleanor led him inside, hyper-aware of any signs of Bee's presence she might have overlooked. The shared wooden bowls were tucked away, the picture-based communication materials stored in the loft. Only the journal remained visible on the side table, which she casually covered with her scarf as Marcus surveyed the room. "Impressive renovations," he noted, producing a thermos from his pack. "You've done this all yourself?" "I'm more capable than I look," Eleanor replied, accepting a steaming cup. The coffee was indeed excellent. Marcus settled into a chair uninvited. "I've interviewed 17 residents who claim to have encountered something unexplainable in these woods. Most descriptions are inconsistent, as one would expect from frightened witnesses. But certain details recur: height between 7 and 9 feet, reddish-brown hair, distinctive footprints." Eleanor maintained a neutral expression. "Sounds like people sharing the same stories until they believe they've seen something themselves." "Perhaps." Marcus sipped his coffee. "Though I found these last week, about 2 miles from here." He produced his phone, showing photographs of clear footprints in mud, unmistakably similar to Bee's, significantly larger than human prints, with a dermal ridge pattern unlike any known North American wildlife. "Interesting," Eleanor managed. "The indigenous peoples of this region believed these mountains housed guardian spirits who took physical form." Marcus continued. "They left offerings at specific sites to ensure safe passage. I've documented several such locations with stone arrangements that defy natural formation." Eleanor's hands tightened around her cup. Those matched the stone circles on her property. "My research suggests these legends might have biological origins." Marcus leaned forward. "A reclusive, intelligent hominid species adapting to human encroachment by becoming increasingly nocturnal and elusive." "Fascinating theory," Eleanor said flatly. "Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything unusual. Just deer, the occasional bear. Normal wildlife." Marcus studied her face with sudden intensity. "Are you certain?" "Many witnesses initially deny their experiences, fearing ridicule." "Quite certain." Eleanor stood. "And now, Dr. Y, I have work to complete before dark. The mountain nights are long." After reluctantly departing, Marcus paused at his vehicle. "I'll be in the area through spring. Should you notice anything at all, this card has my number." That night, Eleanor checked and double-checked every window before lighting the fire that would signal to Bee it was safe to approach. For the first time since their arrangement began, she considered the possibility that their quiet coexistence might not remain undisturbed forever. The mountain winter deepened, creating a natural isolation that Eleanor welcomed. Heavy snowfall made the access road impassable for weeks at a time, discouraging visitors, including Dr. Wei, who had promised to return but remained mercifully absent. During this enforced seclusion, Eleanor's relationship with Bee evolved beyond simple cohabitation into something she would have once considered impossible: friendship. Bee's vocabulary expanded steadily, though his pronunciation remained labored. More significant was his comprehension. He now understood complex sentences and abstract concepts, responding through a combination of words, gestures, and drawings. They developed a rhythm to their days. Mornings for Eleanor's solitary work, afternoons for shared activities, evenings by the fire exchanging knowledge. One bitterly cold January evening, Bee arrived at the cabin carrying something wrapped carefully in leaves. He presented it to Eleanor with uncharacteristic ceremony. "For you," he managed, the consonant still challenging his non-human vocal apparatus. Eleanor unwrapped the gift to reveal an exquisitely carved wooden pendant on a braided cord. The design depicted the cabin with 2 figures beside it, surrounded by protective forest imagery. The craftsmanship was remarkable, especially considering the size of Bee's fingers relative to the delicate details. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, immediately slipping it over her head. "When did you make this?" Bee made a series of gestures, indicating many nights of secret work. She understood now why he had sometimes seemed especially tired in the mornings. "Night watch," he explained haltingly. "Keep safe." The implications settled over Eleanor gradually. While she slept, B had been standing guard, protecting her from the dangers he knew existed in these mountains, perhaps including human threats, like Dr. Wei. "You don't have to do that," she said. "You need rest, too." B tapped his chest, then pointed to the window. "My home long time. No danger." That night, B shared more of his story through their developing communication system. His people had once been numerous in these mountains, living in small family groups that occasionally gathered for what Eleanor interpreted as seasonal ceremonies. Disease had claimed many, but human encroachment had been the true destructive force. Logging, mining, and eventually tourism had fragmented their territory until only B's family remained. His parents had taught him to avoid humans at all costs, with one exception, the man at the cabin who left food during harsh winters and played strange sounds on a small metal object. Eleanor recognized this as her great-grandfather from the journal description. B had been young then, but his memories remained vivid across the decades. Now, B was the last. The child-sized figure marked with an X in his drawings had been his mate, lost years ago to human hunters who had tracked her for sport. Eleanor wept when she finally understood this part of his story, the magnitude of his solitude dwarfing even her post-divorce isolation. In turn, Eleanor shared more of herself, photo albums from her phone showing her children, her nursing career, the life she'd left behind. B studied the images with intense curiosity, asking simple questions about the strange environments and technologies displayed. "Why leave?" he asked, pointing to pictures of her former suburban home. "I was invisible there," Eleanor explained, struggling to translate the concept of emotional emptiness. "Here, I matter. I have purpose." B nodded, clearly understanding more than his limited vocabulary could express. He touched his chest, then hers. Same. As January surrendered to February, Eleanor's health flourished, despite the harsh conditions. The chronic back pain that had ended her nursing career faded under B's tutelage. He showed her how to prepare teas from specific bark combinations, taught her stretching movements adapted from his own daily routines, and applied pressure to precise points along her spine with gentle, knowing fingers. In return, Eleanor read to him nightly. History, science, literature, filling gaps in his understanding of the world beyond the mountain. He proved an eager student, particularly fascinated by astronomy. On clear nights they would stand in the clearing while Eleanor pointed out constellations, explaining that the same stars shone above distant cities. "Stars better here," B declared with certainty. "Too many lights there." Eleanor couldn't disagree. She found herself marking time less frequently, checking her phone only occasionally for messages from her increasingly distant former life. The mountain had become her world, its rhythms her heartbeat, and its silent guardian her closest companion. One morning, Eleanor realized she hadn't thought about returning to civilization in weeks. The first hint of spring arrived in March, with gentle rain replacing snow and tiny green shoots appearing in the clearing. The improving weather meant Eleanor could no longer avoid a trip to Pinecrest for supplies. Her dwindling coffee reserves finally overcame her reluctance to leave the mountain sanctuary. We watched her prepare for departure with evident concern. Though they'd established patterns for short absences, this would be her first extended journey since winter's depths had isolated them together. "I'll return before dark," Eleanor assured him, packing her bag. "Just a quick trip for essential." B nodded, but his restless movements betrayed his unease. He'd grown accustomed to her constant presence, just as she had to his. Finally, he pressed something into her hand, a small carved wooden token depicting a simplified mountain with the cabin at its center. "Remember home," he said simply. Eleanor tucked the carving into her pocket. "I won't forget." Pinecrest had changed little, though Eleanor found herself viewing it with new eyes. The artificial lights, the manufactured buildings, the hurried movements of people all seemed strangely foreign after months of natural rhythms. At the general store, Tom greeted her with genuine warmth. "The mountain hermit returns," he exclaimed. "We were starting to wonder if we'd see you before summer." Eleanor smiled, loading supplies into her basket. The winter was peaceful. Exactly what I needed. "Well, you missed plenty of excitement down here," Tom said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "That university fellow's been stirring up all sorts of talk, showing pictures of giant footprints and offering rewards for information." Eleanor's hand froze over the coffee beans. He's still around? Comes through every couple weeks, asking questions." Tom shook his head. "But that's nothing compared to what's planned for next year." "Heard about the resort?" "Resort?" Eleanor repeated blankly. Tom pointed to a glossy brochure displayed near the register. "Summit Pines Resort and Wilderness Adventure Center. Breaking ground this summer just north of your property. 300 luxury cabins, helicopter pad, the works. Been in planning for years, but they finally got all the permits." Eleanor grabbed the brochure with trembling hands. Colorful images showed a massive development, sprawling across what she recognized as the northern forest. As primary foraging grounds, a detailed map confirmed her worst fears. The resort would border her small property, cutting off the wildlife corridor that connected the eastern and western mountain ranges. "Progress, I suppose," Tom sighed. "Though between you and me, I'm not thrilled about the traffic it'll bring. Still, jobs are jobs, and this town could use the boost." Eleanor paid for her supplies mechanically, mind racing. The brochure went into her bag, along with several local newspapers she'd spotted with headlines about the development. Rather than immediately returning to the cabin, Eleanor drove to the Pinecrest Library. The elderly librarian helped her locate county planning maps and environmental impact statements for the Summit Pines project. What she discovered confirmed her worst fears. B's territory would be effectively bisected by the development, isolating him in an increasingly small forest pocket. At the courthouse next door, a sympathetic clerk provided information about her property boundaries and rights. The news wasn't encouraging. While her 5 acres were indeed hers, they represented a tiny island in a sea of land zoned for development. The access road she'd been using was technically an easement that the resort developers could legally modify or relocate. "Your best bet might be selling while prices are high," the clerk suggested. "Once construction starts, you'll be dealing with noise, dust, and traffic for years." Eleanor returned to her car with a heavy heart and a bundle of maps. The afternoon sun was already lowering as she drove the familiar route back to the mountain. Near the turnoff to her access road, a new sign had appeared since her last journey down: "Future home of Summit Pines Resort, luxury wilderness experience." Bo was waiting at the edge of the clearing when she arrived, his relief at her return palpable. Eleanor unpacked the groceries silently, arranging the maps and brochures on the table before finally meeting his gaze. "We have a problem," she said softly. That night, as B examined the development plans with growing comprehension, Eleanor made a decision that surprised her with its clarity and certainty. This mountain had given her purpose when she had none. Its guardian had offered friendship when she was alone. Now both were threatened. She placed her hand over the maps, drawing B's attention. "I won't let them take your home," she promised, the words feeling like a vow. "Whatever it takes, whatever I need to do, this forest stays protected." B's large hand covered hers, dwarfing it completely. In his eyes, Eleanor saw something she recognized: trust built on shared solitude and mutual understanding. "Our home," he corrected gently. 2 weeks of research had yielded limited options for stopping the resort development. Eleanor had explored legal avenues, environmental regulations, and property rights, all while keeping B's existence hidden. The resort developers had meticulously navigated the permitting process, leaving few procedural vulnerabilities to exploit. On her third trip to the county offices, Eleanor noticed a flyer for a community meeting about the development, scheduled for that evening at the Pinecrest Community Center. It promised an open forum for local concerns. She decided to attend, hoping to gauge public sentiment and perhaps find like-minded opponents. The meeting room was surprisingly crowded when Eleanor arrived. She recognized some faces from the general store, but remained largely anonymous, the mountain hermit observing from the periphery. The presentation by sleek resort representative emphasized economic benefits, jobs, and minimal environmental impact through sustainable luxury experiences. During the question period, Eleanor noted a pattern. While many residents welcomed the promised economic boost, a vocal minority raised concerns about water usage, wildlife impacts, and the changing character of the region. Among the most articulate critics was an elderly Native American man, whose dignified objections carried particular weight with the audience. After the meeting, Eleanor approached him as the crowd dispersed. "Your points about watershed protection were compelling," she said by way of introduction. The man studied her with keen eyes set in a deeply lined face. "Joseph Rainwater," he offered, extending a weathered hand. "You're the woman living in the old Mitchell cabin." Eleanor confirmed this, surprised at being recognized. "That land has history," Joseph said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to being listened to. "My grandfather knew Jonathan Mitchell. They shared an understanding about the mountains." Something in his tone made Eleanor pay particular attention. "Would you have time for coffee?" she asked. "I'd like to hear more about that history." They settled at the only cafe still open in Pinecrest. Joseph, she learned, was a respected elder of the Malkepmix tribe, whose ancestral territories included the mountains surrounding Pinecrest. He'd spent decades documenting traditional knowledge and advocating for cultural preservation. "Our stories speak of the Sasquatch as Kalant guardian spirits of the wild places," he explained. "Not beasts, not men, but keepers of balance. When I was a boy, my grandfather would leave offerings at certain places in the forest, ensuring safe passage through their territories." Eleanor chose her words carefully. "Do you believe they still exist?" Joseph gave her a measured look. "I believe our modern world leaves little room for ancient beings. If any remain, they would seek the most remote places, far from human interference." He paused. "Like the forests around your cabin." The implication hung between them. Eleanor felt certain he was offering an opening, testing whether she could be trusted. "The resort would destroy those forests," she said finally. "Among other things," Joseph agreed. "Which is why several of us are organizing opposition, though our chances are slim. The developers have political connections and deep pockets." "I need to protect my property," Eleanor said, then added deliberately, "and everything that lives there." Joseph's eyes narrowed slightly. He reached into his pocket and removed a small object, a carved stone pipe, visibly ancient and worn smooth by generations of handling. "My grandfather received this from a Mitchell," he said, placing it on the table. "They shared secrets about the mountain guardian. Some bonds transcend cultural differences when they serve a greater protection." Eleanor touched the pipe respectfully. "I found my great-grandfather's journal. It mentioned friendships with the indigenous people who understood the forest's true nature." "The development can still be fought," Joseph said, his voice lowering. "Environmental impact statements can be challenged. Cultural heritage sites can be documented. The process can be delayed, perhaps long enough to find a permanent solution." He slid a business card across the table. "We meet every Wednesday at my home. Bring what you know, but only what you're certain should be shared." The following Wednesday, Eleanor found herself in Joseph's modest home on the reservation adjoining Pinecrest. 6 others were present: an environmental lawyer from a non-profit, 2 tribal preservation officers, a wildlife biologist, and 2 elderly tribal members, who sat silently, observing. For 2 hours, they discussed legal strategies, potential environmental violations, and the discovery of what might be culturally significant stone arrangements on the proposed resort grounds. Eleanor contributed carefully, never mentioning B directly but emphasizing the unique ecological importance of the area. After the others departed, Joseph gestured for Eleanor to remain. He stoked the fire in his small wood stove before speaking again. "My grandfather told me that Jonathan Mitchell was considered Kupi were keeper of secrets, worthy of trust. His gaze held hers steadily. The forest guardian has accepted you in the same way, hasn't he? The question struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Joseph raised his hand before she could respond. Do not confirm or deny. Some knowledge is safer unspoken. He handed her the ceremonial pipe. Keep this at the cabin. It marks you as a friend to those who understand the old way. As Eleanor drove home under starlight, the pipe carefully wrapped beside her, she realized she was no longer fighting alone. Whatever happened, B now had additional protectors, even if they never acknowledged his existence aloud. April brought renewal to the mountain. Wildflowers carpeted the clearing, trees budded with fresh green, and birdsong filled the mornings. Eleanor and B had settled into a comfortable routine of shared meals and forest walks, now that snow no longer confined them. Their communication continued to improve, with B mastering nearly 100 spoken words, while understanding hundreds more. The coalition Joseph had assembled was making progress. The environmental lawyer had identified several procedural flaws in the resort's permits, while tribal representatives documented potentially significant cultural sites within the development area. These efforts had already delayed the groundbreaking by several months. Eleanor was tending her newly planted garden when she noticed something unusual, a flash of metal among the trees across the clearing. Shielding her eyes against the spring sunshine, she focused on the spot. There it was again, sunlight reflecting off something that didn't belong in the forest. She abandoned her trowel and moved cautiously toward the tree line, trying to appear as if she were simply gathering kindling. As she drew closer, she spotted it, a small camera mounted about 7 feet up a pine trunk, its lens aimed directly at her cabin. Fresh scuff marks on the bark suggested recent installation. Heart racing, Eleanor scanned the surrounding forest. She found 2 more cameras positioned strategically to cover different angles of the clearing and cabin entrances. All were well camouflaged, professional-grade trail cameras with motion sensors, the kind used by wildlife researchers or serious hunters. She knew immediately who was responsible. Dr. Wei had returned, but this time he'd abandoned direct approach for surveillance. The implications chilled her. How long had the cameras been recording? Had they captured images of B? Eleanor carefully repositioned each camera to face tree trunks or sky, then rushed back to the cabin. B was due to return from his morning foraging soon. She needed to warn him and sweep the property for additional devices. By sunset, they had located 7 cameras total, including one disturbingly close to B's favorite resting place in the forest. Eleanor collected them all, piling the expensive equipment on her kitchen table. Each bore small identification numbers and university department tags, concrete evidence of Wei's intrusion. She was examining the memory cards when an engine sound penetrated the evening quiet. B immediately retreated to their prearranged hiding spot as Eleanor stepped onto the porch to face the approaching vehicle. Dr. Wei emerged from his silver SUV, his normally pleasant expression replaced by barely concealed anger. "Miss Mitchell," he called, striding toward her, "I believe you have some equipment that belongs to the university." "You mean the spy cameras you illegally placed on my private property?" Eleanor crossed her arms. "Yes, I've removed them." Wei's smile was tight. "Those cameras were positioned for a scientific wildlife study with all proper permits from the forestry department. Not on my land they weren't," Eleanor countered. "My property line is clearly marked and you've trespassed repeatedly." Wei's pretense of civility slipped further. "Let's be honest, Miss Mitchell. You know exactly what I'm tracking, and it's not ordinary wildlife." "I know you're invading my privacy," Eleanor replied evenly, "and harassing the local fauna for your academic ambitions." "I have evidence," Wei said, his voice dropping. "Partial footage captured before you discovered the cameras. Large, bipedal movement patterns. Unusual vocalizations picked up on the audio sensors." Eleanor's blood ran cold, but she maintained her composure. "Sounds like a bear to me. They stand on hind legs frequently." "We both know it's not a bear." Wei stepped closer, lowering his voice. I've dedicated my career to proving these creatures exist. One clear photograph, one DNA sample, that's all I need. Scientific documentation, not exploitation. Noble intentions, Eleanor replied coldly, which is why you're sneaking around rather than asking permission. Wei's expression hardened. I requested cooperation months ago. You chose obstruction. Don't you understand the scientific importance? This could revolutionize our understanding of primate evolution. At what cost? Eleanor challenged. Have you considered that some discoveries shouldn't be made if they destroy what you're trying to study? That's not your decision, Wei snapped. These creatures belong to science, to human knowledge. They belong to themselves. Eleanor fired back. And this land belongs to me. Take your cameras and leave. Now. Wei collected his equipment with poor grace, but paused before returning to his vehicle. I tried the collegial approach, Miss Mitchell. What comes next won't be so friendly. He gestured toward the forest. Tell your large friend that his privacy ends with the spring thaw. I'm bringing a full research team next month, with proper authorization from multiple agencies. We'll set up a perimeter study that doesn't require access to your precious property. After Wei departed, Eleanor remained on the porch, trembling with anger and fear. He emerged cautiously from hiding, his expression showing he'd understood much of the confrontation. Bad man, he rumbled, the consonants still difficult for his non-human vocal structure. Come back. Yes, Eleanor agreed grimly. But we'll be ready. She clutched the wooden pendant Bea had carved for her, its meaning now carrying even greater significance. The threat was no longer abstract. It had a face, a timeline, and a determination that matched her own. That night, Eleanor called Joseph. They needed to accelerate their plans. Joseph's environmental lawyer friend, Sarah Blackwood, sat at Eleanor's kitchen table reviewing documents spread before her. The spring rain tapped gently against the windows as they discussed increasingly limited options. The resort development has been delayed, but not stopped, Sarah explained, her finger tracing lines on a boundary map. And Dr. Y's research expedition has secured permits through multiple agencies, Fish and Wildlife, Forestry Service, and the University Board. They're establishing a research perimeter that surrounds your property entirely. Eleanor pushed aside her cooling tea. Can they actually do that? Create what amounts to a blockade? They're calling it a comprehensive ecological study area, Sarah replied grimly. And yes, it's technically legal as long as they don't physically enter your property without permission. They'll monitor everything that moves in or out of this 5-acre parcel. The implications were cleared, but effectively become a prisoner, unable to range through his traditional territory without detection. His decades of careful concealment would end the moment Y's team captured evidence of his existence. What about turning the property into some kind of sanctuary or preserve, Eleanor asked. There must be legal protections we can establish. Sarah pulled out another document. There are several options, but all have significant drawbacks. A conservation easement would restrict development, but wouldn't prevent scientific research. Your wildlife trust designation requires documented evidence of endangered species habitat, which creates a catch-22 in your situation. She hesitated before continuing. The most secure protection would be establishing a tribal cultural heritage site, but that requires formal tribal council action and federal recognition, a process that takes years. Eleanor stared out the window at the rain-soaked forest. We don't have years. Ware returns with his team next month. After Sarah departed, Eleanor explained the situation to Bea as best she could. Though his English comprehension had improved dramatically, concepts like property law and conservation easements remained abstract. What he understood clearly was the threat. His freedom and safety were at risk. Hide deeper mountains, he suggested, pointing to the distant peaks visible from the cabin window. Eleanor shook her head sadly. There's nowhere remote enough anymore. Satellite imaging, drone technology, thermal sensors, they'd track you eventually, and the resort development would cut off access to those areas anyway. B absorbed this in silence, his massive frame unnaturally still. Finally, he placed one large finger on the property map, circling the small square that represented Eleanor's land. "Make bigger," he said simply. The idea germinated over the following days. If Eleanor could somehow expand her protected property to include crucial portions of B's territory, they might create a sustainable sanctuary. But purchasing adjacent land would require resources far beyond her modest savings. The resort developers had already secured options on surrounding parcels at prices reflecting future development value, not current forest land rates. One evening, staring at her dwindling bank balance, Eleanor made a difficult decision. She reached for her phone and scrolled to a contact she'd avoided for months. Her daughter, Catherine. Catherine answered on the third ring. "Mum, is everything okay?" "I'm fine," Eleanor assured her, realizing how long it had been since they'd spoken. "But I need your help with something important." The conversation was awkward at first, months of minimal contact creating distance between them. Catherine, an environmental attorney in Seattle, listened skeptically to Eleanor's sanitized explanation about needing legal advice regarding her property and the threatening development. "Let me understand this," Catherine said finally. "You bought a cabin in the middle of nowhere, disappeared for months, and now you're fighting a major resort development because you've become an environmental activist." Eleanor winced at her daughter's skepticism. "It sounds strange, I know, but this place is special, Catherine. It needs protection, and you need a lawyer," Catherine concluded. "I'll come this weekend. I want to see this cabin that's turned my pragmatic mother into an eco-warrior." After ending the call, Eleanor sat motionless, overwhelmed by competing emotion. Catherine's legal expertise could prove invaluable, but her arrival would complicate everything. How could she explain B? The truth seemed impossible, yet continuing to hide him from her own daughter felt equally wrong. B found her still sitting by the phone, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "Sad?" he asked, crouching to meet her gaze. "My daughter is coming," Eleanor explained. "She can help us legally, but—" She gestured helplessly toward him. B considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Daughter, good like mother." The simple question caught Eleanor off guard. Was Catherine good in the way B meant? Trustworthy, compassionate, capable of accepting the impossible? "Yes," Eleanor said finally. "She's good, but she's also practical, logical. She may not believe you're real." B made a sound that approximated a chuckle. "Show her, then believe." Eleanor stared at her unlikely friend, marveling at his simple wisdom. Perhaps the time for secrets had passed. If they were to protect this mountain sanctuary, they would need allies who understood exactly what and who they were fighting for. "You're right," she agreed, reaching for the property deed on the table. "It's time for the truth." Catherine Mitchell's sleek hybrid looked comically out of place beside Eleanor's weathered Subaru. She emerged from the vehicle with the brisk efficiency that had propelled her through law school and into a successful environmental law practice. Tall like her mother, but leaner, with the same determined chin and observant eyes. Eleanor embraced her daughter, suddenly aware of how much she'd missed her despite their complicated relationship. "Thank you for coming." Catherine surveyed the cabin and clearing with professional assessment. "It's more charming than I expected," she admitted, "though I still don't understand why you'd buy a place so isolated." "It grows on you," Eleanor replied, helping with her daughter's overnight bag. "How was the drive?" "Enlightening. I stopped in Pinecrest for coffee and heard all about the mysterious widow who lives alone on the mountain." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You've become quite the local legend." Inside, Catherine examined the renovations with grudging approval. "You did all this yourself?" "I had some help," Eleanor said carefully, watching her daughter She'd spent the morning removing the most obvious signs of B's presence, though his handcrafted items remained integrated throughout the cabin. Catherine paused at the kitchen table where Eleanor had deliberately placed her great-grandfather's journal and the family photo album she'd brought from her previous home. "Is this Jonathan Mitchell's journal? The one you mentioned?" "Yes. It turns out this cabin has been in our family for generations." As Catherine settled in, Eleanor prepared dinner, working up her courage for what needed to happen next. They spoke of family matters, Catherine's work, her brother's children, the life Eleanor had left behind. The conversation flowed more easily than Eleanor had expected, the mountain's peaceful setting softening, old tensions. After dinner, Eleanor took a deep breath. "There's something I need to show you. It's why I asked you to come beyond the legal help." Catherine's expression grew wary. "Mum, you're not ill, are you? Is that why you've been so reclusive?" "I'm healthier than I've been in years," Eleanor assured her. "What I need to show you is outside. It might seem impossible at first. I just ask that you keep an open mind." Dusk was settling over the clearing as they stepped onto the porch. Eleanor had arranged with Bee to approach from the forest edge at her signal. A flashlight beam swept in an arc. "Catherine, what I'm about to show you must remain completely confidential. You can't tell anyone, not even your brother. At least not yet." Eleanor clasped her daughter's hand. "Do you understand?" Catherine frowned. "You're scaring me a little. What is this about?" Instead of answering, Eleanor raised the flashlight and swept it in the pre-arranged signal. For a long moment, nothing happened. Catherine shifted impatiently beside her. Then the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps emerged from the darkening forest. Catherine tensed, instinctively moving closer to her mother. "What's that?" she whispered. "A friend," Eleanor said simply. Bee emerged from the trees with deliberate slowness, his massive silhouette unmistakable even in the fading light. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, waiting. Catherine's hand clamped onto Eleanor's arm with bruising ins. "Mom," she hissed, voice strangled. That can't be." "His name is Bee," Eleanor said calmly. "He's lived on this mountain his entire life. This was his home long before it was mine. We share it now." Catherine's legal training and rational mind visibly battled with the impossible reality before her. She took an involuntary step backward. "This isn't real. It can't be real." Eleanor signaled Bee to come closer, and he approached with his characteristic grace, stopping about 10 feet from the porch steps. In the soft porch light, his features were clearly visible. The intelligent eyes, the expressive face that Eleanor had come to read as easily as human emotions. "Hello," Bee said carefully, the greeting they had practiced. Catherine's legs seemed to give way. She sank onto the porch steps, her professional composure shattered. "It talks. Oh my God, it actually talks." Eleanor corrected gently. "Not it." For several minutes Catherine simply stared as Eleanor explained their unlikely friendship, the threats from Way and the developers, and their need for legal protection that wouldn't expose Bee to the world. Throughout, Bee remained patient, occasionally adding simple words to confirm Eleanor's account. Finally, Catherine looked up at her mother, with new understanding. "This is why you couldn't leave. Why this place matters so much." Eleanor nodded. "He's the last of his kind as far as we know. If his existence is discovered, he'll be captured, studied, displayed. Everything that makes this mountain special will be destroyed." Catherine's legal mind began visibly reassessing the situation. The implications are staggering. Scientifically, anthropologically, legal. "I don't care about implications," Eleanor said firmly. "I care about protecting him and this forest. That's why I needed someone I could trust completely." Catherine stood slowly, approaching Bee with cautious wonder. He remained still, allowing her inspection. "Family," Bee said, gesturing between mother and daughter. To Eleanor's surprise, Catherine smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her professional reserve. "Yes," she agreed softly. "Family." She turned to her mother with newfound determination. "All right, let's figure out how to save your friend." Catherine had extended her weekend visit to a full week, working remotely from the cabin while developing legal strategies to protect Bee and his habitat. Her initial shock had transformed into fierce determination, a trait Eleanor recognized from looking in the mirror. We've created a three-pronged approach, Catherine explained, spreading documents across the table where B now sat comfortably with them. First, we're challenging the resort's agement impact statements based on watershed protection. Second, we're working with Joseph's tribe to document cultural heritage sites that would trigger additional reviews. Third, we're filing for a special conservation trust status for this property. Eleanor studied the complex legal documents, impressed by her daughter's thoroughness. Will it be enough? It buys time, Catherine admitted. But we need to deal with Dr. Y separately. His research permits are valid, and he's not technically trespassing if he stays off your property. Their planning session was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines growing louder on the access road. Catherine moved to the window. 3 vehicles, she reported. SUV in front looks like Y's. Behind that, a larger truck with some kind of equipment and a black sedan. Eleanor and B exchanged concerned glances. This is earlier than he promised, she said. He's not supposed to return with his team until next month. B retreated to the bedroom as Eleanor and Catherine stepped onto the porch to meet the unwelcome visitors. We emerged from his vehicle, followed by 2 research assistants carrying equipment cases. From the black sedan came a man in an expensive suit, clearly not a scientist. "Miss Mitchell," we called with forced cordiality. "I see you have company." "Perfect timing, actually. You're trespassing again, Dr. Weir," Eleanor replied coldly. "And you're a month early," we gestured dismissively. "Plans change. Allow me to introduce Maxwell Reed, Vice President of Development for Summit Pines Resort. We've been having some fascinating conversations about mutual interests." The suit-wearing man stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Ms. Mitchell, we've been eager to meet you. Your property has become quite central to our development plans." Catherine moved slightly forward. "Catherine Mitchell, environmental attorney. Any discussion regarding my mother's property should be directed through me." Reed's smile faltered momentarily. "Of course. Well, perhaps we could all speak inside. We're comfortable right here," Eleanor said firmly. We signaled to his assistants, who began unloading what appeared to be sensing equipment from the truck. "We won't take much of your time. Mr. Reed has a proposition that might interest you, while my team establishes our perimeter study." Catherine stepped down from the porch, her professional demeanor shifting to confrontational. "Your team will establish nothing until we review your permits. This property has pending conservation trust status," Reed interjected smoothly, "which is exactly what we hope to discuss. Summit Pines is prepared to make an extremely generous offer for your property, Ms. Mitchell. 3 times market value plus relocation assistance. It's not for sale," Eleanor stated flatly. "Perhaps you haven't heard the figure yet," Reed countered, removing a document from his leather portfolio. "We're prepared to offer $750,000, cash transaction, immediate closing." Eleanor felt momentary vertigo at the amount, far more than she'd ever expected for the small cabin and 5 acres. Such money could secure her retirement, help her children, provide everything she'd once thought important. She glanced at Catherine, whose expression remained professionally neutral, despite the substantial offer. "Mr. Reed," Eleanor said carefully, "I appreciate your offer, but this land has been in my family for generations. It's not about money." Wise stepped forward, his patience visibly thinning. "Miss Mitchell, let's be direct. We both know what's living in these woods. Summit Pines is willing to pay a premium because they need your land for their access road, but they have no idea why this particular parcel matters so much to you or to science." Reed looked between them, confused. "What is he talking about?" "Nothing," Catherine interjected sharply. "Dr. Way is attempting to leverage his unproven theories to pressure my client." Way's expression hardened. "Not unproven for long. My team begins work today, with or without your cooperation. When document what's here, this property will become the center of international attention. Better to accept a generous offer now than deal with what comes after." As if on cue, one of Way's assistants approached with a document. "Sir, This just arrived by email. The cease and desist order from Ms. Mitchell's attorney has been temporarily overridden. We're clear to establish monitoring stations on the perimeter. Way smiled triumphantly. You see, progress marches forward. He turned to Reed. Your company has secured the proper easements for preliminary work? Reed nodded, though he still appeared confused by the undercurrents of the conversation. Our surveying team arrives tomorrow to mark the access road route. All permits are in order. Eleanor felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. They were moving faster than anticipated, outmaneuvering Catherine's carefully constructed legal delays. She glanced toward the cabin, knowing B could hear everything through the open window. His world was shrinking by the minute. This discussion is over, Catherine declared, pulling out her phone. I'm calling for an emergency injunction. Until then, anyone who sets foot on this property will be charged with criminal trespass. Way's assistants had already begun setting up equipment at the property line, technically legal, if infuriating. The scientist gave Eleanor one last meaningful look. Time is running out for secrets, Ms. Mitchell. For everyone's sake, I hope you'll reconsider. Morning arrived with the mechanical growl of heavy equipment. Eleanor woke to the distant sound of chainsaws and the beeping of vehicles in reverse. She found Catherine already at the window, phone pressed to her ear as she spoke urgently with legal colleagues. They can't do this, Eleanor insisted, watching smoke rise from beyond the ridge where the access road would cut through previously undisturbed forest. Catherine, your injunction is still being processed. Catherine finished grimly, ending her call. They're exploiting a loophole. The preliminary work is being done on adjacent public land where they already have permits. They're moving faster than the legal system can respond. He emerged from the loft where he'd spent an increasingly restless night. His acute hearing made the distant destruction impossible to ignore. Cutting trees, he said, his expression solemn. Many trees. A vehicle approached the cabin, not the expected construction equipment, but Joseph's weathered truck. The tribal elder wasn't alone. Behind him came a procession of vehicles carrying members of the Environmental Coalition and Tribal Preservation Committee. Eleanor and Catherine met them in the clearing as they assembled, nearly 20 people, some carrying signs protesting the development, others unloading cameras and documentation equipment. Word travels fast in small communities, Joseph explained. When the bulldozers arrived before dawn, our people started calling each other. A younger tribal member approached with a large topographic map. They're clearing the main access corridor first, he reported, pointing to a line that came disturbingly close to Eleanor's property boundary. But their permits require archaeological assessment before ground disturbance. They're skipping that step. Joseph's expression was grim but determined. Then we document the violation and force a work stoppage. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes conveying a deeper message. We need to slow them down long enough for something important to be discovered. Eleanor understood. What do you need us to do? Stand your ground, Joseph replied simply. We'll do the rest. The coalition mobilized with surprising efficiency. Teams dispersed along the property boundaries with cameras documenting the construction activity. Others established a human chain across the partially cleared access route, forcing work to temporarily halt. Catherine joined a group of legal observers collecting evidence of permit violation. By mid-morning, the confrontation had escalated. Sheriff's deputies arrived, called by the construction foreman to remove the protesters. News vans followed, alerted by coalition members who understood the power of media attention. What had begun as a quiet mountain morning had transformed into a chaotic standoff. Eleanor remained near the cabin, torn between joining the frontline resistance and staying near B, who watched the unfolding events with growing distress from just inside the tree line, where he remained hidden from the increasing number of outsiders. We arrived around noon, looking both irritated and excited by the commotion. He approached Eleanor where she stood at the edge of her property. Quite the circus you've organized, he remarked. It won't change anything, you know. Merely delays the inevitable. Sometimes delays are all we need, Eleanor replied. We studied her with narrow-eyed calculation. He's still here, isn't he? On your property right now. I can feel it. Before Eleanor could respond, a shout rose from the human chain near the construction site. Joseph was calling for attention, his voice carrying surprising power for his age. "Stop the machines! Stop everything!" he commanded, holding something aloft. "We've found something the authorities need to see." The commotion shifted toward Joseph. Construction workers, protesters, and media converged where the tribal elder stood beside a freshly bulldozed earth berm. Eleanor and Wei, momentarily united by curiosity, moved closer. Joseph had placed his jacket on the ground to protect what appeared to be a stone marker, partially unearthed by the construction activity. About 2 feet tall, the weathered stone bore unmistakable carvings, symbols and pictographs that even Eleanor could recognize as man-made. "This is a sacred boundary marker," Joseph announced, his voice carrying to the news cameras. "It designates the traditional sanctuary of the forest guardians, placed here by my ancestors generations ago. Under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, all work must cease immediately for proper archaeological assessment." The construction foreman protested, but the sheriff's deputy, a local man who had known Joseph all his life, radioed for his supervisor. News cameras captured everything. Wei pushed forward, examining the stone marker with professional interest. "This could be quite significant," he admitted reluctantly. "Potentially thousands of years old." "There will be more," Joseph stated with quiet certainty. "This entire ridge is documented in our oral traditions as the pathway of the forest people. Our ancestors marked the boundaries of their territory out of respect." As if on cue, another tribal member called out from 50 yards away, "Here's another one, partially buried but definitely carved." Eleanor glanced back toward her property, catching a glimpse of Bourging from the shadows. For the first time since the confrontation began, she saw something like hope in his expression. The construction supervisor's radio crackled with an incoming call. After a brief conversation, he signaled to his crew. "All work is suspended pending investigation," he announced with obvious frustration. "Everyone clear the site." A cheer rose from the protesters. Eleanor exchanged glances with Catherine, who gave a subtle nod of victory. It wasn't over, far from it, but they had won the first critical battle. Joseph approached them quietly, the ancient stone marker now protected by a circle of his tribal members. "The mountain remembers," he said simply, "and sometimes it reveals its secrets at exactly the right moment." Autumn returned to the mountain, painting the forest in fiery hues of orange and gold. 1 year had passed since Eleanor purchased the cabin for $25 a year that had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined. She sat on the porch with Catherine, watching the sunset bathe the clearing in warm light. A thick folder of legal documents lay open between them, the top page bearing the official seal of the newly established Mitchell Forest Conservation Trust. "It's finally done," Catherine said, the satisfaction evident in her voice. "Signed, sealed, and recorded with the county. This land is protected in perpetuity." The months following the discovery of the sacred boundary markers had been a whirlwind of legal battles, media attention, and delicate negotiations. The stone markers had triggered federal protection requirements that halted the resort development indefinitely. Archaeological teams had documented dozens of similar artifacts throughout the proposed construction area, creating a protected cultural heritage zone. Wished reluctantly abandoned his research permits after Catherine leveraged his unauthorized camera placement into a university ethics investigation. His academic reputation had suffered, though Eleanor suspected he would eventually return to his quest with more careful methods. Most significantly, Joseph's tribe had partnered with a national conservation organization to purchase the surrounding forest land from the discouraged resort developers. Combined with Eleanor's property, now held in permanent trust, nearly 2,000 acres of critical habitat had been preserved. "I still can't believe we pulled it off," Eleanor said, sipping her evening tea. "All those forces aligned against us, corporate money, academic ambition, government bureaucracy. We had better forces on our side," Catherine replied. "Truth, justice, and a very compelling reason to fight." She glanced toward the forest edge where Bigfoot emerged at dusk, How is he adapting to the changes? Better than expected. The increased human activity during the archaeological survey was difficult, but now that things have quieted down, he's reclaiming his territory. The trail cameras Joseph's people installed at the boundaries give us early warning of any intruders. Catherine nodded, gathering the documents into the folder. I spoke with Mom, officially making her trust. The trust documents establish her as the legal guardian of this land, with protection of its unique biological and cultural resources as the primary mission. After she's gone, the trusteeship passes to me. Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace at these words. The future she had feared, be it captured or killed, the forest destroyed, her mountain sanctuary lost, had been replaced by something sustainable. The legacy would continue beyond her lifetime. Your flight back to Seattle is tomorrow morning? Eleanor asked. Yes, though I'll be back in a month to check on things. Catherine had been spending more time at the cabin, drawn both by her mother's presence and the remarkable being they now jointly protected. The Seattle office is understanding about my remote work arrangement. As darkness settled over the clearing, Bee emerged from the forest. He moved with the same fluid grace that had first astonished Eleanor, but now carried himself with greater confidence. The need for constant hiding had diminished as their protective perimeter strengthened. Evening comes, he said, his vocabulary continuing to expand through their regular lessons. Stars clear tonight. Perfect for our tradition, Eleanor agreed. Together, the three of them walked to the center of the clearing. This monthly ritual had begun in summer. On clear nights, they would gather to observe the stars, while Eleanor shared stories of the wider world, and Bee contributed his deep knowledge of the mountain's rhythms. Bee pointed to the eastern horizon, where the first stars appeared. Same stars everywhere, he said, repeating a concept that had particularly resonated with him. All people see same sky. That's right, Catherine confirmed. The same stars shine over cities and forests alike. They sat in comfortable silence as more stars emerged. Eleanor found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her here, from invisible suburban ex-wife to guardian of an extraordinary secret and protector of ancient forest land. At 59, she had found purpose and connection far beyond anything she had imagined possible. Mother happy here, Bee observed, his perceptiveness still sometimes catching Eleanor by surprise. Yes, she agreed simply. Very happy. Catherine come back soon? He asked. I promise, Catherine replied, her initial fear of Bee long since replaced by genuine affection. This is family land now. I'll always return. Eleanor reached out, taking her daughter's hand on one side and Bee's massive but gentle hand on the other. Together they formed a circle beneath the emerging stars, an unlikely family united by something more powerful than blood, a shared commitment to protecting what mattered. The cabin behind them glowed with warm light, no longer the dilapidated shelter Eleanor had first discovered, but a true home. In its walls resided not only her present happiness, but the promise of continued guardianship for generations to come. The mountain had given Eleanor a second chance at a meaningful life. In return, she had ensured its most remarkable inhabitant would remain safe, its ancient forests protected, its secrets preserved. As the stars fully emerged above them, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that her $25 investment had purchased something truly priceless.